Okay, wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our first UPF Careers in Film and Media webinar with a really exciting panel. I'm very honored to have organized this event and reached out to people that we know in our immediate network of fellow filmmakers, fellow documentary filmmakers. We have a really exciting panel. Alex is going to introduce everyone. He's going to lead a discussion. And really the objective for today is for this to be practical, for this to be hands-on, and for everyone on this webinar to really get their questions answered. So for folks that are interested in pursuing storytelling through film and media, whether that be in editing room, whether that be as a producer or as a director, this webinar will be your opportunity to get a big picture on the inside. What is the day-to-day life of a producer, of an editor, of a television host? So with that said, thank you all for being here. Take it away, Alex. You're muted, sorry.
There we go.
There we go.
Thank you, Daniel, and welcome everyone. Assalamu alaikum. We are, in this COVID world where we're trying our best to do these webinars. Technical difficulties do present themselves. It's a overcast day here, and we're having some connectivity issues. I hope everyone's able to hear us clearly. Zarinah Shakir is going to be joining us through my phone, so that's how we will be talking to her today. And let me begin by introducing her, and then I'll introduce the other panelists as well. We have, as I said, Zarinah Shakir. She is the producer and the host of the award-winning Perspectives of Interfaith show. It's a national television program that has run for over 17 years. She's the former producer host for 6 years of Islamic Perspectives, a television program which was the longest running program about Muslims and Islam in the Washington metro area. She's also the radio producer and host of The Struggle Continues on WPFW, a 1-hour radio program through the Pacifica Network. And that show focuses on a myriad of topics relevant to diverse communities. And I could go on. She is a frequent speaker, has led or served on the board of several organizations, and God willing, there's a lot more to come for Zarinah. We also have Amina Chaudary. Give a little wave there, Amina. She directs and produces cinematically told stories. Her style is to have strong characters with personal and compelling struggles and challenges in their lives. These issues that she covers are a range of personal, social, and political issues facing us today. Her latest film, actually one that I very much enjoyed, Amina, Tariq's Cube, won the Audience Award at the Globe Documentary Film Festival and was broadcast at the World Channel on PBS. She's also co-directed a feature-length film, #LiveLikeHarris, which is in consideration right now for streaming and broadcast, hopefully this fall or winter. And she's in post-production on 2 films about to be released on the World Channel. So Amina is a very accomplished filmmaker. I'm sure we'll have a lot to share with the group. And then finally, trying to round out the cinematic workflow here, we have an editor with us, Salman Syed. I'm sorry, Salman Syed. He's the film editor of Seth MacFarlane's sci-fi, I guess we call it a dramedy, the Orville, it's called, sort of a, would you say sort of a spoof in a way, or a parody on Star Trek, though it has serious elements as well. It's a great show, by the way. You can find it on Fox or Hulu. And his other editing work includes Netflix documentary series Diagnosis, another one called Flint Town, and also Inside Bill's Brain, Decoding Bill Gates. He also edited the documentary Perda, which was named one of the best independent films of 2019. And it's now, by the way, streaming on Amazon Prime. When I was reading his bio, he's sort of like a superhero. He has a very interesting origin story, how he got involved in this business. So we'll look forward to hearing a little bit more about that later. And I always say that, the films are really made in the editing room. So we're really happy, Salman, to have you on this panel with us. Okay, so let us begin. So one of the reasons we wanted to hold this panel, in addition to sort of, giving people an insight into what it's like to work in the business, how to be successful, how to get started, all that. But let's start with the question of why. Why is it important, particularly at this moment, but in all moments, but why is it important for people of color, for Muslims, to be engaged and working in the media? And Zarinah, we're going to start with you. I'm going to hold the phone up to the microphone here. And why don't you tell us why, give us your perspective of why you would encourage young people to be engaged in the media.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I think we all hear you very well.
Wonderful, wonderful. And again, assalamu alaikum. I would say not just for young people, because I'm an elder. You can't tell because you all can't really see my picture now, or you can't see me. But what I think is important is that we have to tell our own stories. You hear different people say, you need to share your narrative, you need to say your narrative. And with that being said, as an African-American Muslim woman who was born and raised in the United States and became a Muslim many, many, many years ago, I find that people need to know our stories because they misrepresent us, they being in the media. Some media does that to us. Sometimes we misrepresent ourselves, or we're not speaking up enough. Sometimes they'll say, well, we didn't hear from you. You didn't say this, or you didn't say that. Well, I'm going to say, as I think Alex and Daniel and others know, you don't have to speak for me. I can speak for myself. And when I do our television show, Perspectives of Interfaith, the reason I bring on certain guests is so that they can share their faith tradition, who they are. They're not necessarily scholars, just writing about what Islam is or certain forms of Judaism or Christianity. They are telling their specific story. So as I would say to young people, be mindful that your life, your story is important, and start journaling or writing it down, or at least sharing it with people or putting it on.
Excellent. Amina, what would you say to add to that thought?
So, yeah, I think about this a lot, in part because of the path into how I became a documentary filmmaker myself, which I think we'll touch upon in a little bit. But, it's true that this is about identity, and it's true that if you don't tell your own story, it will be told for you. And it's true that, if you don't tell your own story, that you're invisible in some ways. At the same time, I think that there is a huge variety of stories that should be and can be told within the American Muslim experience itself. So in no way is the American Muslim experience a monolith. There are so many different types of lived realities and lived experiences. And to make this personal to me, I had a mentor in undergrad, Suleiman Yang. I mean, he wasn't at my university, but he used to frequent my university often. He's a well-known scholar of American Islam and also modern African history. And he said something to me one day that I think just clicked. And that was, if you don't take to recording your stuff now and the experience of those that you're associated with or that you get to know, if you don't take that time now, then when history looks back at this time period, they will have very little to go by. So even if this is not something that, you produce a story now, or you produce a documentary, or you write something, or whatever the case is, if you don't have impact on it right now, it will have impact in 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, because that now is part of history. And so in some ways you are aiding to the documentation of lived reality now. And I think that sort of impacted me because, I'm not just a documentary filmmaker, I'm a biographer as well. I'm working on a number of biographies at the moment in different formats. And I think that a lot of the motivation is sharing these stories and sharing the lives of people as they exist now, because it will be pertinent and it will be relevant and it will be important in years to come, if not now.
Absolutely, yeah. Very, very true. And that's you know, we really miss Suleiman Yang. You know, he died a few years ago, and he was so encouraging to me too when I was first starting 20 years ago doing this work, and the whole idea of telling your own story, the importance of that. Salman, you are in a slightly different position in the sense that you're not necessarily working just in the space of telling Muslim stories, but you're working in a major network television program. So what do you see as the importance of being a Muslim in that kind of setting? I mean, you know, the topic is not Islamic per se, but I'm just imagining your presence in some respect must have an impact.
Yeah, actually, well, first of all, assalamu alaikum to everybody. And it's interesting that you prefaced the question that way, because that's how I was going to answer it. Because being on the sort of back end of the filmmaking process, as opposed to what Zarinah and Amina are doing, I'm not creating the product and getting it up on its feet, you know, like we're on the back end. So similar to if you're in the writer's room or in the edit room, I think just having a presence is important. Because like I've worked on documentaries, now I'm working on this show for Fox. And actually I'm the assistant editor on it, I'm not the editor on Orville, but just having the presence, because unfortunately the industry is very not diverse. You know, I've worked for 13 years, and just yesterday I was having a conversation with somebody. I've only worked with 3 other people of color in my career so far, and 0 of them were editors. 1 of them was a woman, 2 were men. And that's pretty sad. And, you know, just, I think having a presence in those rooms, in that workplace, I was just thinking about this. I want to say back in 2011, I had 2 coworkers. I forget exactly what had happened in the world, but I had 2 coworkers who turned to me and said, "Hey, you're Muslim, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And they had some questions for me. And it was really strange, because it was nice that they wanted to ask me these questions instead of just, you know, going off of what they had heard. And then I realized, like, oh, if I hadn't been working here today, who knows what thought they might have had and what impression they would have had. But I think just being in those spaces is really important for us.
I completely agree. And I also completely agree with the idea that, you know, the media is overwhelmingly white. And I do encourage, you know, I always tell the joke, you know, so many people my age, let's just say, who are parents, want their children to be doctors and lawyers. So immigrant parents, you know, that's a big push. They want their children. But I always say, you know, you should encourage your children to be journalists and lawyers and filmmakers, you know, to have an impact on culture. So I congratulate you for doing that. Amina was saying something earlier, Zarinah, that I thought you might want to comment on, you know, when she was talking about the importance of documenting our stories. And I know we were involved in a small way, but in supporting you a few years ago when you were doing a very interesting documentary and documenting the founding women of in the African-American Muslim movement. Do you want to talk a little bit about that project? I thought that was a very interesting project and tied in with the whole notion of the importance of, you know, documenting these stories or they'll be lost.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Alex. And let me just say that the blessing and you and UPF were a part of my funding base, which I so appreciated that, and I thank you once again. Excuse me. It actually started with the Humanities Council in Washington, D.C. Come up with some other ideas, but another person, including, I think all of us can say something about Dr. Suleiman Yang. We've all had our own experience with him, and may Allah be pleased with him. I was told, because of that I was advised, why don't you do something about the African Muslim women and the pioneer women? So I did part one and part two. Both of them are almost an hour long. And these are women between the ages, or they were, they are much older now, but it was between the ages of 72 to 94 years old. All of that comes to Islam as converts, reverts, return, whatever term is being used these days. But then they grew up as Christians in the South. And what is going on right now in our country and in the world, they were speaking about some of those same situations happening to them back then. And here we are, 2020, dealing with similar issues of Black people, men and women, and children being shut down, hung. We're recently hearing about 2 young men in California. And so when I spoke with these women, each one of them, we interviewed them for about an hour, and they shared so many things that reminded me of myself growing up in the church and then coming into Islam. It's so important for us, even with our parents, grandparents, our aunties, uncles, and all of that, and ourselves. I know Alex knows for sure. But the thing that we do need to be mindful of is, unless we tell these stories, they won't be told, or they'll be told again, as I heard Amina say, from someone else's perspective. Right. And that's what happens so often. But the blessing right now is there are a lot of people who are doing the work, younger, middle age, older, that understand that other people want to know what our story is. Right. And we need to know, and we want to know.
Right. Well, there's a bunch of questions coming in, so let's get to some of them right now. I'm reading one, and there's actually a question I often hear from young people who are like in high school, and I think Amina, let's start with you on this one, because I think you may have a different answer than Salman. So the question is, in order to be in film and the media, must you go to film school? Must you go to some media school? Is a graduate degree necessary to get into media, or is it better just to have direct experience? Or are both important? So let's start with you, Amina. What is your educational background, first of all, and how do you answer that question? Does somebody need to go to film school in order to do the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, so this is a great question, because, you know, I sort of went back and forth in my own lived experience. So if I go back to how I got to where I am now, I was always sort of intrigued with visual storytelling. I mean, since I was a kid, I always had a camera in my hand. In undergrad, I attempted to make photojournalism, create my own major in photojournalism. And I got really sidetracked. And I think a lot of that is because I didn't have mentors. I didn't meet you until later, Alex. I wish I met you earlier, but I didn't have, other than Salman Syed, I didn't really have sort of a mentor that told me that, like, oh, you can go into film and you can go into like visual storytelling as a career. And so, just family or just circumstances, I got really sidetracked. And so I went into politics for a while. I went into human rights. I worked for a former UN High Commissioner of Human Rights. I worked on a presidential campaign. And the funny thing is, in all of that, I always went back to the same thing, which is recognition that in each of these different platforms, unless you have, you have a stage, or you have a means by which you're able to spread your message, or a means by which you're able to let people know about certain circumstances that are happening in the world, people won't know. And I think that, like, in the presidential campaigns that I worked on in 2007, I was in press and media, and so much of what I did was establishing the shot, right? So not to say that presidential campaigners don't like have one-on-one and like off the record meetings, they do. But at the same time, much of the effort was put into like, how will this translate on camera and how will this look on camera? And I think that was the switch for me, because I realized that if you have the ability to move people and motivate people through the camera, or through that visual storytelling, then you have great power. And so I did go back to school in 2007. I did a professional track at NYU in film, but I didn't actually get into film until about 7 years after that. And what I learned sort of the harder way is that, it was nice going to school and learning some technical skills, but I applied none of that or very little of that when I was actually producing a film.
Right.
In 2014, I found a story, and I think that it was literally just me being captivated by a story. And I called, who would later be the subjects of the film, really wonderful people. I mean, I have nothing but good things to say about the subjects of this film. And I called them up and I said, I'm really interested. I think this is a film. This should be a story. I flew out there, I bought my own camera, and it just sort of hit the field, and I learned on the job. And there's a lot of lessons that I want to point to, sort of the first few films that I worked on, which are now starting to become released, which I think we'll get to eventually. But in short, no, I don't think that you need to go to film school. You really learn. This is the type of thing where you learn on the job, and in this day and age, everybody's a filmmaker, everybody, because you have access to your cameras, you can get GoPros pretty cheap, you can get whatever the case is. But the real art of filmmaking and the real art of this type of work is story crafting, and it's working with the editors, like people like Salman, where the real magic happens, like, in the editing room itself, but having like clear direction and clear purpose, like as you're filming. So,
Right.
For all the young people out there, I would say that if you can't go to film school or it's not in your capacity, you don't need to. I don't think that you have to. I think just literally take a camera or your phone and figure out, how do you create a narrative arc and how do you create a structure of a story, and then use that to put something together. And the more you do it, the more you'll learn.
I think that's a great, I mean, I think, having done this for 20 years myself, ourselves struggling, to come up with ideas and hearing many ideas. I mean, I think there's a big difference that people should recognize between a concept and a story. There are a lot of great concepts. A story about, a documentary about this topic, a documentary about that topic. There's a lot of great concepts, but the question always is, well, what's the story? A story has to have conflict. A story has to have, like you're saying, an arc. And crafting that story is really, one of the skills. Well, in the editing room, that's what you're doing all the time. You're crafting stories. So Salman, did you go to film school? How did you learn how to be an editor? And how did you get your job with the Orville?
So it's strange, because you're right. You don't necessarily have to go to film school. I started learning editing when I was still in high school. And then that's when I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in film. And, I looked up to a lot of people for advice, and even looked at a lot of my favorite filmmakers, people who back in the 70s and 80s had gone to film school. And for me, I realized there were things I was learning on my own, but if I could get into a film school, then I could probably learn them in a more formal setting and faster. And more importantly, no one that I knew worked in this industry. Nobody in my family, none of my friends, even though I'm in Los Angeles, like I didn't grow up knowing anybody who worked in this field. So that was one of the big things of going to film school, meeting other people. And a lot of times there are people who their families have been in this business, or in fact, my first job that I ever got when I was still in college, I was working night shifts on a reality show that came through a classmate of mine who was already working there. And so mainly it was for the networking purposes.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that's really crucial. And you were sort of touching on this too, Amina. Crucial to note that if you want a job in the film business, they're never advertised. You don't find them on job boards. It's really who you know. It's word of mouth. And so that probably is the most valuable thing about film school, is the networking opportunities you have. But if you don't do it, it's also, if you get on a job, people get to know you, you do good work, they recommend you for future jobs. So where did you go to school?
So I got my BA from Cal State Northridge, and then I went to the American Film Institute and did a MFA in editing. And that too was, again, at a certain point, I had people telling me, you know what, you can just start working and work your way up. And I've worked with editors and other assistant editors who never studied film, never went to film school, and they just started working. But then for me, I just felt like I needed to get that kind of rounded out education in this. And I think if you are able to go to a film school, you know, it's different nowadays, because I feel like YouTube is a big thing, and just the whole social media platform. I graduated undergrad 10 years ago, and YouTube was not what it is now. People were still making things, but now it's a whole new ball game. So I think what Amina said is very true. You can tell a story, pick up a camera, pick up your cell phone. You know, there's award-winning short films that are made on an iPhone. I think also you have to understand if there's a technical skill that you're trying to get after. For instance, for me, it was editing. I have friends who are cinematographers. For that, you might need to take some classes or try to go to school for, because it's a little bit different. I feel like a lot of being the creator of something is you're bringing a lot of your own experiences into it. And so like what Amina said, that the stuff she learned in school isn't what she uses in her day-to-day. And I think even for me, having gone to film school, it's very true. There's experiences that you bring with you in whatever project you're doing that it's like, oh, you know what? I didn't learn this in school, but something in me is like relating to what this is.
Amina, you're the definition of an independent filmmaker. So what is your process? I mean, I'm just curious, like, do you do your own editing too, or do you hire someone to be an editor, or what's the process you, like, for example, the great documentary you made about Tariq, which was a fab, I recommend that to the audience listening. This is really a fabulous documentary story, very, very sweet, but also kind of compelling in its own ways. Talk about conflict. There's a lot in it. But what is your process? Do you do the whole thing? Do you hire people to do parts? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I will. I think it varies. But I'm more of a director that I like to be in the editing room. I don't actually drive, as in I'm not holding the mouse. But I work very closely with my editors, and I have really wonderful people, and actually a lot of thanks to UPF as well, because I think UPF has always been sort of, Daniel and Alex have always been mentors of mine that I've turned to, and I said, hey, I kind of need some help here. Can you guide me along? And so part of that included, here are some editors, you can work with these people, these are really great. And I think that always helps. My biggest thing is my biggest takeaway, if anything, for any young person that wants to get into this, is find a mentor. That's like the biggest thing ever. But going back to your question, I think I'm sort of in the entire process of it, like finding the story, vetting the subjects, working with them, building the trust, kind of going along with, I'm often holding the camera as well. Sometimes some directors do, sometimes they don't. I've worked with a variety of directors over the last 10 years, even 15 years. And I think every approach is different. So, that's sort of learning on the job and learning with every single project that you do and every single film that you do. I have 2 films that, one feature length, as you mentioned, that is hopefully going to be released in the fall, and 2 others that are in production, one in post-production. And each of them were different. Every single one of them, the process was different. But in general, it's sort of, it's sort of all the same. It's like building that trust, because you're the person that is going to be responsible to the subjects, responsible to the story, responsible to the end product. And so I'm sort of along for the entire ride. I will literally sit in the editing room and work with the editor and kind of piece things together. But I know every documentary director is different. And I mean, I also will say that the type of sort of niche that I'm in is a little bit different than Salman's and Zarinah's, because I'm in unscripted documentary storytelling, which is, I think, very different than a scripted film, fiction-based or even non-fiction based. And Zarinah, who I think, is doing more of like the headline media work. I don't know, Zarinah, you can clarify, but I think that the type of experience that I'm in and that I have is based on this sort of unscripted, real life, as it happens and as it unfolds, storytelling.
Very tough, yeah. By the way, we've lost Zarinah. We're hoping she's going to call back in. When Zarinah comes back, we'll ask her that question. So when people ask me, when young people ask me about the film work, and people who don't really know, they naturally think of the camera, and I always try to point out that the actual filming is the smallest part of the filmmaking process, right? So the biggest part is all the prep, figuring out the story, as you were talking about, refining that. If it's a documentary, going through the work of who you're going to interview, refining that over and over again. And then the editing process itself takes many, many weeks, months even, whereas the filming can take 10 days, 2 weeks. Even a big project like our last film, The Sultan and the Saint, which had big, action sequences. We filmed that in 3 weeks, but the project itself took a year and a half. So most of that time was at the other end. But that makes me ask you, Salman. First of all, was there a particular attraction to editing? Why did you want to be an editor? And I'm just curious too, how much freedom, creative freedom, do you feel as an editor working on a project?
Okay, so yeah, I guess for editing, like I grew up watching tons of movies, reading tons of books, and it wasn't until high school that I got into filmmaking, and I realized like my love of art and literature and everything was kind of in this field. And like I said, as most kids, I watched a ton of movies growing up, but I just never thought of it as a viable career. And, I dabbled a little bit in writing and directing and filming my own things, but there's something about being in the editing room and trying to tell the story there and finding these moments where things may not be turning out how you expected them to. And then there's just this light bulb that goes off and you're like, oh, what if we have this happen and then this happens? And it's just putting these little pieces into context to tell the story. So there's just something about that attraction that for me has always rang true. And as far as creative freedom, I think Amina was correct with how she was saying. I think each director is different. It's really about who you are as a creative person. There's some directors who want to just have the editor do their thing and then they come and look at it and you guys both work together. There's some directors who need to be a part of every little process and watch everything. I've worked with directors who once they've shot it, they remember everything. So they don't need to like sit and look at everything to the most like degree. But it's just however you are as a creative person. So as far as my freedom as an editor, my job is to tell the story. It's not to get in the way of the story. And I think that's a lot of people say the magic happens in the editing room, but it's not just because the editor, it's because of the rest of the team. And I wanted to talk about one thing you just mentioned earlier, that the shooting is a very small part of the process. I think for people that are interested in this field, that's important to remember because there's tons of different positions. I think people always look at the sort of more popular positions of obviously being on screen or being behind the camera, editing, writing, directing. But, if you want to work on a set, there's tons of jobs there.
What are some of the jobs?
I mean, even in the cinematography department, there's lighting, gaffing, there's grips. Even on the post-production side, besides editing, if you're into music, there's sound design, which is a big part of the editing process.
Yeah.
And even, in pre-production, there's writers assistants, even assistant directing. So there are other things, because I think sometimes people think, I want to work in this field, but I don't really have a story to tell.
Yeah.
So that's fine. Like there's tons of other jobs. And with what Amina said too, there's broadcast news, there's scripted television, there's unscripted, there's documentaries. I was speaking to a woman yesterday who's works in corporate films. She's Pakistani Muslim and she has a business and they do corporate things. And, so there's just a wide array of things that you can do in this field.
I'm glad you pointed out music too. I mean, there's a lot of people I know who are really interested in music, but they're never going to be in an orchestra. Or anything like that, and they don't want to have a career of just teaching piano lessons or something. And I've now, we've made 15 films, something like that. Worked with probably that many composers. People have careers and good ones, just composing music for films, documentaries, television programs, and so forth. So if you're interested in music, I mean, that's a very viable avenue. Hey, Zarinah, we lost you for a little bit, and while we did, a question had come up for you. Are you there? We got you still?
Yes.
Oh, good. We can hear, yes. So we've been talking right now about, sort of filmmaking per se, but of course, you're really, you're kind of maybe a little bit more of a journalist in a way, or a news show host. So how do you go about creating the news stories that you cover, and how do you build, as a TV host, how do you build a story?
Okay, well, let me respond, and I'm so sorry that I did lose you all, and I didn't hear most of the answers, but I could hear what Salman was saying, and even when you mentioned something about music. And interestingly enough, my grandson, who graduates next week, same day as his birthday, he'll be 18, and he told me he wants to be an audio engineer, and now he's talking about he wants to be a producer, producing music, rap and hip-hop and whatever. But what I would like to say with that is, if you aren't the composer and you're not in an orchestra, I mean, my background originally was with music for the numerous instruments that I play, but what people need to also understand is, just like what I just went through in terms of technology, we need people who understand the technical side of all of these businesses, whether it be film, television, radio, music, and on and on. We need people who understand it, because you never know where you may be working. It could be in another country or somewhere where you're just completely left to your own devices, and you get back on the air. So all I have right now is a cell phone. What I can say about my television show, Perspectives of Interfaith, which you mentioned, we've been on for 17 years. We're one of the longest running interfaith programs in America. And our show goes international when they stream it, when it's up and running on Sundays and on Tuesdays. So what I would like to say is, where do I come up with stories? Well, because I listen to a lot of radio myself. Interestingly enough, although I do a television show, I'm not that interested in what's on television these days. I am interested in films. I'm a film buff. But what I do is I'm listening to other people's stories, and I say, wow, he'd be a great guest, or she'd be a great guest. Or maybe we can talk about some of what their faith tradition is about, or how does music come in. Case in point, I'm working on a upcoming show, because of Perspectives of Interfaith, on gospel. And there are numbers of types of gospel music. And it isn't all just with Black people, although that would really be much of my focus. But I come up with stories just by hearing what other people are talking about, and when they're being interviewed on some of the popular NPR shows, or I see them on PBS.
Interesting. Amina, you were talking a little bit earlier about starting out, and maybe the best thing that we all could share with a young filmmaker to be, or news show host to be, is what do you wish you knew that you know now that you didn't know then? Like, what would be something that you would tell a young person who wants to do this work?
My internet seems to be really unstable for some reason. Can you hear me, Alex? Because you're muted. Okay. Yeah, so there's a lot that I would say. I think that there's so much that I learned. My first film was really difficult. And the reason why it was so difficult was because I went into it trying to learn on the job, which is not a bad thing. But I also went into it not having mentors to guide me along. I've sort of, gone over that now, and I try to mentor younger people because of the experience that I had. But I think that the biggest thing I could say is, find a mentor and work with them. So I was actually quite naive, I think, on the process of making a film in my first film. And as a result, the team itself was very big. It was, we had multiple production companies involved, multiple like pre and post editors, multiple producers. It was like a whole bunch of people that were just sort of involved with this very long process. And I think that as the director of it, I, in some ways, I think may have, because of my naivety, might have gotten not taken advantage of, I'd say, but more of not being able to be the authoritative voice in the way that I needed to be. And I think that in directing a story, you need to have that. I mean, you have to know what you're doing, and not to say that you're born a director, because nobody's born a director. Like you have to. There's always going to be the first of everything, and that includes the first story that you're actually going to do and actually going to put forth. And I think what I would have wished is that I had a mentor that I could say, so and so is saying this and this and this to me. Could you verify if this is true? Or does this make sense to you? And so I would say, just starting off, you're going to learn a lot on the job. But in the process, make sure you have a fallback, make sure you have someone that you can say, like, this is sort of what's happening to me. And the other thing I want to say, a really big takeaway is that, especially in the type of work that I'm in, which is the unscripted documentary work, sometimes you have to walk away from a story. Sometimes the subject will walk away, and that's okay. And sometimes you have to walk away. And this is all because, in some ways you have to be realistic to the fact that you have limited resources, there's limited capacity, there's limited bandwidth, and sometimes things just don't happen. I mean, I have a number of stories, and this is the case. I'm part of many different like director forums in documentaries. I mean, with hundreds, thousands, some of them 10,000 people. And, this is across the board. I think that sometimes a film just doesn't happen, no matter how much effort and energy you put into it, or time or resources. Sometimes it's just not going to be a film. And I think that's okay. And I think that that's where, work like what Zarinah does comes in, because a lot of these stories are really important stories to tell. And I think that they deserve to be told. But, I'm not in a shorter segment, more current affairs type of story crafting, although that's also very important. And, I was doing that for a while. I'm more in, I want to take a story and have a longer stretch of being able to tell the story, and having it be politically and socially, relevant to something that we're experiencing in our day.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're making a very good point, and it's also good advice for any young filmmaker. Is, first of all, the people who I have encountered over these years who have failed to launch, as they say, have been people who have had just one story, and they hold on to that, and even when it's not working out, they just don't want to let go. You have to have. I mean, even in our work at UPF, we always have a half a dozen stories that are at some place in the pipeline, and of that half a dozen, in the course of 2 years, only one becomes a film. Because you're right. There's so many. You got to fund the film. You've got to have the right. You got to know what the audience is. Any of us right now, I always say that if we had to come up with an idea that would get on television today, we could come up with an idea and get it on television right now. But when you're doing the film work, you got to anticipate what an audience wants 3 years from now, because that's what, by the time you start to the time it's broadcast, it's a 3-year period. Getting Zarinah back here. It's a 3-year period. It takes time, so you have to, sometimes that changes as well. What the audience wants, what they're looking for. So I agree with that. The other thing that you said, and I think it's important to underline, is you've got to be willing to change and adapt your story as you go along. Filmmaking is a collaborative process. And again, a lot of filmmakers, young filmmakers, who I see struggling and sometimes failing, is because they have the idea, they have the way they want to tell the story, and they just are not able to change as other talented people come in with ideas that could make it better. So those are two things. Having, I guess, the word that defines both is having some flexibility. You've got to be flexible.
Yeah, and can I just add something
to
that?
Please.
Yeah, the other thing I want to say also is, again, in my type of field, which is the unscripted documentary telling, but there's so many variables. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that I have gone in thinking, I know the story, I know the subject, I know what's going to happen, I know the outcome. I already know the story. It's going to be 30 minutes. It's going to be, this is the ending of it. This is the start of it. And that never happens.
Yeah.
And I think because it's real life and you're dealing with like real life subjects, you're dealing with their lives itself. Things just happen. I mean, Tariq's Cube itself is a really good example where I had an idea of wanting to follow this boy who's like a Rubik's Cube genius. And I had an idea that, I wanted to see what the outcome would be. But in that process, so much stuff came up, and things just brought like, watching the film, I think you'll see, but while we were filming in 2017, there was a hate letter that was received at his mosque that we had filmed at a year earlier. And the mosque, the letter had said, pretty awful things. I mean, you can look at it. We put it in the film. And that was not expected. That was just a variable that came out of the product of filming. So I think that there's always, the target always moves. I mean, it's kind of steady over the long run, but the target kind of always moves. And I think going into this type of filmmaking, you have to set your mind to the long haul, and you have to set your mind to being open to whatever comes your way.
Yeah. Salman, let's talk about a completely different issue in getting engaged in the film business. Maybe your story isn't relevant to this question, but I'll ask you to start with, which is, what about resistance from family and the community who don't see film as a viable career? Did you experience that, and what's your advice, or how do you overcome that?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that. But actually, a lot of what Amina said too, I can relate with. But as far as resistance, when I decided I wanted to go into this field, I remember being at the mosque, and uncles would ask you, "What are you studying? What are you working in?" And I would tell them, "Oh, I'm going to film school." And I still remember one day at Jummah, this one uncle said, "Oh, you shouldn't go in that field. They're not going to accept you because you're Muslim." And I was like, "Well, that's why I think I should be in there, because there aren't no Muslims." And he was very adamant, like, you're not going to get a job. They don't want us. This is like 2006.
Right.
And it's funny, I'm thinking back on it. I've never experienced anything in my field that has been negative because I'm Muslim. There's people in my own community who told me that I would. Like, I heard that more from the Pakistani and Muslim community starting out than I ever have experienced actually working in the business. Because I think the bottom line is if you can do the work, if you're good, if people like working with you, they don't care who you are, what your background is. And I think that's something people should know, because I feel like a lot of our families work in different fields. And if you say you want to work in film or music or art or writing or anything that's not traditional, there's a sort of resistance, which is natural because it's the unknown. And I think now, alhamdulillah, like there's so many, like when I was in college, we had a group of like 10 other people that I knew who were Muslim here in Los Angeles who were working in this business. And now they have all these different like networking groups and meetups, and there's hundreds of people from our community, kids, students, who are trying to get into this field. So as far as resistance, I'm sure there are people who have experienced resistance in the professional workspace. I'm not trying to deny that. But I think if this is something you want to do, you have to be a little stubborn. If people tell you you can't because of who you are, if you really believe that you want to do it because of whatever your personal reason is, you need to keep doing it. And Amina's mentioned this a couple of times about having a mentor. I 100% believe in that. I think it's on you to find your mentors. So like every job I've ever worked in, every project I've done, I try to take something from the people that I work with, because you never know, the thing you learned on this one project, whether it was a personal thing or some insight you had into just the world, how that might help you on something else later. Yeah. And a lot of times working in this business, because it is a very non-traditional business, and like Amina said, a project could change at any moment. I just interviewed for an editing job last week that the next day I found out the network canceled. the show had to do with cops, and with everything going on right now, they decided we don't want to try this. We're going to hold off. So there's real life things that happen in our projects, whether it's scripted, documentary, any type of media that, you know, it's just, that's just the part of the business.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, part of what we do at UPF, of course, is, you know, we work in Hollywood, and we try to set up something a few years ago, being a networking group you should be part of it, actually, if you're not part of it, a networking group that's in LA of Hollywood professionals of all kinds. And it's mainly for networking purposes, and people doing all kinds of different things. But, you know, when Michael and I started UPF, we looked, there are about 10,000 names on the Writers Guild of America, right? People who are writing for film and television. And one of the people who kind of runs the Writers Guild told us that of 10,000 writers, there were only 3 or 4 Muslims at 20 years ago. You know, which tells you a lot about why, you know, Muslims often feel like, you know, we're cliched and we're stereotyped in negative ways. Well, because there's no one who knows anything about the community. That's changing. And that's why I very much encourage, you know, young people to go into the media. It is a business. It is a career. And you can, I mean, look at all of you. You can succeed and make a career out of it. It's its own path.
Can I say something to that?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
You're talking about writing, but I feel like that can, I think, translate into every aspect of making a film or making a documentary or whatever it is. Like I mentioned earlier, I haven't worked with that many people of color in editing, and there's so many decisions that happen on a daily basis that end up in the final product, that if the film was made without a diverse group making it, like there's things that we end up seeing that we get annoyed by. But you have to realize, if our people, or even just other minorities, other people of color, weren't there to say, hey, you know what, when you say that actually means this, then you know, like it's important for us to be in those spaces, because a lot of times I think people don't understand how they're doing and what it becomes portrayed as if we're not there to guide them.
And I think that's the key word: decisions. Whether you're writing, whether you're editing, whether you're directing, whether you're in art design, whether you're music, whatever it is, the key thing is you're making decisions all the time, and you make them under deadlines, and you make them under pressure, and your experiences inform the decisions that you naturally rely on to make. I mean, in an editing process, like, as you know, well know, I mean, I sometimes when I'm speaking to young people, I mean, very young people, you know, we'll watch a scene of a film, and I'll say, now let's count how many times do you think we cut to different shots? And, you know, they'll say 3, 4, you know, stuff like that. And then we'll watch that 2-minute sequence, and it'll be 25 or 30 different cuts back and forth. And every time you, the editor, are making a decision on what we're seeing in one of those cuts, you're breaking a stereotype, or you're reinforcing a stereotype, depending on the story. So decision making is the key there. I agree. Hey, Zarinah, when we lost you there for a second, we had a question for you. Everybody was, you know, everyone was asked, I asked everyone to answer, when you were just starting out, right, in your work, when you were just starting out, what do you wish you knew that you know now that you didn't know then, that would have made your life a little easier? Like what lesson or what insight did you gain later that would have been a big help starting out?
Well, let me just say, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have to keep asking because I can't see anyone. I would say, again, now, I'm much older than all of you.
Except for me.
No, Alex, I'm older than you too. So, but be that as it may, what I want to say, and again, I'm a woman and I'm African American, and there were a number of things as I listen and watch and hear what's going on in our world today, you know, and even the Me Too movement. Believe me, I was part of Me Too, but we could not come up and say what was happening to us. It wasn't a casting couch or something like that, but there were things that happened to me and others that I know being in this business. And that's why I moved into different things. I've taught school, and I've done a number of other things because I needed to pay rent and pay a car note and take care of a son that was growing up. And I would say, what is it that I should know, or that I know now that I didn't know then? I would agree somewhat with what I'm hearing you all say, that you need a mentor. But again, who was going to be my mentor? Who was my mentor if there was no one there in the first place? And what I would say, which is moving away, a little bit away from the mentorship and all of that, because that's wonderful if you can find one and someone that will agree to take you on. I've had mentors, but not in this business. But what I would say is there's a couple of other areas that have not been discussed that I think people, particularly young people, need to be aware of. Podcasting. You can learn what that's all about. And many of the people that are into podcasts now, they're doing it because of their own interests and what they want to do. And by the way, my son and my grandson, we're getting ready to start a podcast. It's going to be very different. So just listen, or we'll keep you posted. But the other area is something that people would not necessarily want to go into, but access cable. There are access cable stations all over the country. Now, right now, almost everything is shut down. We know that. This is a temporary situation. And cable access for me was good because I didn't have anyone standing over me telling me, well, that's not what we say here, or that's not what we do. I was in charge of my own show, and I still am. And I don't have someone that, if I was working for a major network, yeah, money would be good, of course, but my life has not always been relegated on money. And if I want to tell a story, or I want to interview certain people, some people are shocked. They're like, you want to interview me? I'm like, yeah, sure. You have a story. And we have people on the access cable who are in editing, producing, directing, lighting, audio, and all of that.
Yeah.
And the good thing about cable access is you're not paying the kind of money to go to some of those top-notch universities and colleges that I did go to one of those in California, but you can learn. It's like OJT. Some of it's on-the-job training. Yeah. And for a younger person whose parents or themselves they don't have all the money, they don't want to get loans, they didn't qualify for the scholarship, then look for some of the other places that are available that can help you. And don't always look at it as it's got to be a brand name or the top-notch college or university or the network. That will not always get you a job. And some engineers have jobs that they've had for years because they didn't want to be in front of the camera or on the mic. So that's what I would say.
Good advice. Good advice, Zarinah. We're closing in on the end here, so I'm going to ask Salman and Amina to also, is there any last bit of advice that you would offer the young filmmakers to be on this webinar?
To what Zarinah was just saying, my very first job was in access cable. And so when I was still in college, I was working for a local show. And I think one thing that, if I could leave a piece of advice, is be humble, because there's a lot of different avenues. And I think people think, oh, I just want to work in movies, and they look down on the other stuff. Same goes with schooling. Like, you never know who somebody's going to become. That's actually one of the best pieces of advice that I got from one of my first mentors, who was a very busy editor, and he took time out to meet with me. And I remember saying, like, hey, I'm really appreciative. Like, you're working on this big film and you took time to have coffee with me. And he said, you could be my boss in 10 years, and that's how this business works. So don't ever look down on any project, on any person you're working with, because you never know, that thing you're editing or filming for somebody that's just like a 5-minute YouTube thing, that person may in a couple of years need to have a bigger project and they want to work with you. So your reputation goes a far way. It goes like a long way to helping you in this business, and just do whatever you can, get your hands on whatever you can, and just be humble with everything.
So humble and persistent and making decisions, finding mentors. These are the key, and being flexible. These are some of the key pieces of advice. Amina, you're going to have the last word, and you got the last question. Let me just read it here. The question to you was, and it kind of goes to advice, I think. How were you able to find your way into the industry when you didn't have a typical, we're talking about the typical paths, going to school, to study film. You didn't have that typical path, as you said. So how are you able to find your way in, and how were you able to overcome the obstacles that you faced? And maybe that's segue into your advice, the obstacles and how you overcame them.
Yeah, actually, I actually really related to what Zarinah was saying. Being a woman in this field, and a minority especially, is really difficult. Because especially if people, like I was saying, when I was just starting off, I think it was understood that there was things that I was still learning. I wouldn't change anything about the path other than, take on a mentor. But I think people can really kind of play into that naivety somewhat. So the one piece of advice I would really say is that if you're going to do it, really believe in it, and really believe that the type of work that I do in terms of documentary films has such a powerful, could have such a powerful impact on everyday discussion, and I think that visually, there is so much good that you can do with this, and it's such a powerful platform. I mean, look at what's happening in our world today, in America today, like in our own neighborhoods, where it's because of the story of a person and what happened to a person, and a pattern of behavior that has existed, right? And then the images that come out and the video that come out. I mean, video itself has such a powerful way to move people and to motivate people. And I think that, if you look at just documentary films itself, some of the issues that we have created a lot of awareness over in the past 10, 15, 20 years, even in the last year or two, have to in some ways came from documentary filmmaking, or filmmaking in general. Like the environmental movement, for example. Some could argue that Al Gore's film had a great impact on making people become more aware. 13th is a film that we're all talking about now. Michael Moore's film, labor issues, gun issues. I mean, these are things that I think people become more and more aware of, because there's power in this type of work. And there's power in this type of story crafting and visual storytelling, and I've sort of done like the whole gamut of things, right? I was in politics, I was in human rights work, I was in print for a very long time. I tried my hand at audio production. I produced a number of audio stories on my own. And I think I landed here in some ways full circle, because I realized that there is a lot of impact and a lot of power and a lot of good and a lot of ability to create change and change narratives and contribute to current affairs and political discussions through it. Really get into it and really believe it, because if you don't believe it, at some point your interest will fizzle. Yeah. Because it changes too rapidly, and I think that there will always be major obstacles, whether it's with people or it's personalities, or it's just the climate itself or the environment itself. So I believe in this work, and I think it's really powerful and critical to do. And I wish everyone good luck. I mean, I really believe in more and more people coming into this, because any little work that one person does is like a tip of, like the tip of the iceberg. It's just, we need more people to actually get into this type of thing, so that you can tell, like I was saying earlier, we're not a monolith. The American Muslim experience is in no way a monolith. There's so much diversity in the story crafting and storytelling. So the more we have in the field, the better off.
Oh, and I just to echo what Salman said, I'm pretty sure I'll be working for you in about 10 years or maybe sooner. So thank you for that. And Salman, thank you as well. Zarinah, I've admired you for many years for all the work that you do. You've been an inspiration to me, if you're talking about mentors. but you've been in some ways a mentor to me just by your example and how hard you've worked with some of the obstacles that I know you've faced and overcome them. So thank you everybody for joining us, for sharing. There's a lot of young people who want to be in the film industry, and you're all an inspiration to all of them. And I'm inspired by you too. So this has been wonderful. Maybe we'll do it again. So thank you all very much. I want to, behind the camera, as they say, just shout out to Fakir Ahmed, who makes all this happen and feverishly keeps the technology going when it fails us. And to Daniel Tutt, who started the program. Daniel's been the one organizing all these various webinars. We've done a couple dozen now since the COVID crisis began as a way UPF's trying to pay back and help people during this crisis by a myriad of different webinars that we're doing. If you have ideas for some topics you'd like us to cover, let us know. You can go to our website, upf.tv, and there's a big banner that says enrichment programs, and you can see what's coming up. There's a lot of great, interesting things coming up, but also the programs that we've done that are recorded. You'll be able to watch them as you can watch this one too. If someone wants to recommend who may have missed this, you can send it to our website and be able to watch it. So thank you all very much. Thanks again, Zarinah. Thank you, Amina. Thank you, Salman. Keep up the good work. I look forward to seeing your projects as they many interesting things that you're doing. And stay safe and stay sane.